Are you willing to be first across the line no matter what the setback and hindrance may be? It's not necessarily a bad thing. Or are you more interested in things you can do along the way? Now, I don't know the situation of the gentleman on your left, but the one on the right, I seen the end of this. It was a marathon race, and the girl on the left, your right, I believe if I'm looking at it correctly. Your left. The girl on the left was in first place, but within 100 meters or so of the finish line, she started to collapse out of fatigue. And the second place runner, instead of just passing her by and finishing, decided to stop and help her. They were subsequently passed by a couple of other runners, and I'm not even sure if they placed. But the one girl decided that it was better to stop and help her fellow athlete finish the race than to actually take first place. You know, for the children here, there may have been a movie some years ago that had cars involved in it. And a similar situation took place right at the end. There was a final competition. There was, I think, a green car, a blue car, and a red car. And the green car, in wanting to finish, gives the blue car a nudge and it crashes. And instead of crossing the finish line in first place, that red car decided to stop and go back. And nobody was really interested in who won the race. They were more interested in why this person chose a different path over sort of winning that race. But how do you define prosperity or success? There's many different parameters that we could define it by. Is it by how wealthy you become or how wealthy you are? Is it your level of education or where you studied? Is it like ancient times where a bountiful harvest and a good crop is the way you measure prosperity? Is it an investment portfolio? Or are you growing your nest egg for retirement? These are all ways to measure your success or prosperity. Perhaps if it's your sporting team, did it win the grand final? Or maybe you're looking for fame or popularity yourself. Again, measures of success. Maybe you're thinking of a business. Or is it friends and family? For some, it may even be how big their family is. And none of these in themselves are inherently wrong. They're just different parameters for measuring prosperity and success. And some of them might change over time. When you're younger, you may be pursuing wealth and fame. As you get older, maybe it's friends and family that become more important in the way you judge whether you're prosperous or successful. What about as a world view? We're not talking these smaller parameters that we just looked at, but broadly speaking, in a whole of life way of considering prosperity or success. We'll go back to our Greek word, the one that was translated as prosper in 3 John. And specifically looking at it, the second part it says, succeed in reaching your destination to have a good result or a happy outcome. Sounds like a pretty good measure. But if we open our Bibles to Hebrews chapter 9, we read in verse 27 of Hebrews chapter 9, we learn something. It says, and as it is appointed unto man once to die, but after this the judgment. Now, even if someone was an atheist or an agnostic, we all acknowledge that at some point in time, we die. So if we take the notion of the end of our life and death into consideration, how is it then possible to prosper or succeed? given this definition or this Greek word here. Succeed in reaching your destination, death. In that sense, we'll all succeed. We'll all get there. But how is that a good result or a happy outcome? I don't think any of us look at death in that way. Maybe some people who struggle from severe depression or something that have suicidal thoughts, maybe they think that it's a good outcome because there's an escape from whatever they're going through. But any person in their right and proper mind wouldn't think of death as a good result or a happy outcome. So let us look at some of these worldviews as we move forward. We have what I've called the religious worldview. This takes in all of the different religions, not just Christianity, but any faith-based worldview. Then we have the agnostics, those who don't know if God exists or not. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I'm just not sure. And on the other side, we've got those who are atheist. God doesn't exist. Equivocally, he doesn't exist. So let's look at prosperity, getting to the end of one's life and death through these separate lenses. A religious worldview, they will look at death as, well, afterwards there's something, depending on what religious stream you want to consider. So you have, your Buddhisms and Hinduism and Sikhism, they all believe in some form of reincarnation. Then you have those who are of the Muslim faith, Catholicism, some streams or sects of Christianity. They believe that when you die, there's an immediate heaven or hell. And then there are other streams of Christianity that we fall into, as well as others, who believe that after one passes, that you are in this sleep-like state where you are unconscious, there's nothing going on, your spirit returns to God, your body decomposes into the earth, but that when Christ returns, you will be raised up to face a judgment, as we read in Hebrews, and after that judgment, then there is a heaven or hell process. And that is a whole other study, but just quickly narrowing in on a point there that a lot of people get stuck on, is that we don't have the belief that there is an eternal hellfire where you burn indefinitely. Eternal in the sense that the result is eternal, but not a continuous indefinite burning. But then you have the agnostic worldview. What do they believe happens after death? Many of them will say they don't know, because they don't know whether God exists or not. They're undecided, they're not sure. So therefore, they're not sure what happens afterwards. Some of them will say nothing, some just they question, they don't know. Atheists, on the other hand, they firmly believe that after death, nothing. But there are two types of nothing. Some of them believe nothing as in you just pass away, decompose, and that is it. Others believe that there is nothing, but there is some form of consciousness, which is kind of hard to sort of grasp. But if you can imagine being conscious, but as complete darkness. If anybody's ever been caving and they turn the lights off, you can sort of put your hand on your nose and you can't even see the fingers in front of your face. That's how dark it is. But imagine that with no sound, nothing. Just that would be torture, quite literally. Because who has ever seen this before? Who knows what this is? Show of hands, anybody? No? Sound room. A sound room is correct. It's a bit more than that though, but you're on the right path. This is the world's quietest room. It was briefly passed, it's built by a university. It was briefly passed by a room that was built by Microsoft, and then this one was upgraded and surpassed that again. So this is currently the world's quietest room. They ran a competition for a number of years where somebody would be paid, I think it was close to $5 million if they could last more than an hour in this room. To give you a bit of an idea, this room's sound level, and I still can't comprehend this number, is a negative 24.9 decibels. I don't understand how you get the negative. It absorbs 99.99% of sound. People who have been in the room say that it is so eerily quiet that after a few minutes they can audibly hear their heart beating, their lungs inflating and deflating as they breathe, and some people have even said that they can hear the blood flowing through their veins because there is absolutely no noise whatsoever. And when people have been put in there to try to see how long they can last, they turn the light out as well, so there is absolutely complete darkness. So this notion that some atheists have that there is a consciousness after you die, but it's just no sound and no light, you're just conscious, would be complete torture. The longest record of somebody staying in this room, somebody has managed to pass an hour, I think 2 people in total, is an hour and 26 minutes. And the people came out, and some of them needed to actually see a counsellor because it was that disturbing, the deprivation of sound and sight and the senses in this room. So that's a world view, or a feeling of a world view, that some people have. But if we go back to look at these world views through that lens of prosperity and success, can the atheistic worldview meet that category of a good outcome from life? Not really. You can't. You get to the end, there's death, but there's no good result or anything post that. The agnostic worldview, because they are undecided whether God exists or not, you sort of put a question mark there. They don't really know what happens. The religious worldview, well, there is a possibility of a good outcome because you have the heaven or hell option if you have a religious worldview. So one of them's bad, but the other's possibly good. So out of all of these worldviews, the only one that offers the possibility of a good outcome is a religious worldview of some sort. So we've covered this off. The good result, a happy outcome, is only possible with a religious worldview. So in continuing now through this lens of a good outcome, a prosperous life, we're going to look at pursuing success or prosperity and how we manage that. This was a quote that was read out or mentioned last Sabbath in the Q&A session, I believe, at the camp. So I'll go through it again for those who weren't there. But this is from the pen of inspiration, specifically aimed at youth, but I believe it can apply to all of us. It asks, what is the aim and purpose of your life? Are your ambitions for education, that you may have a name and position in the world? Have you thoughts that you dare not express, that you may one day stand upon the summit of intellectual greatness, that you may sit in deliberative and legislative councils and help to erect laws for nations? There is nothing wrong with these aspirations. You may, every one of you, make your mark. You should not be content, so you should be content with no mean attainments. Aim high and spare no pains to reach the standard. Mean there meaning average, not just an average attainment. So if we cast our mind back to some of those previous slides we had of those different short-term measures of success in life, whether it's in business or whatever the case may be, there is nothing wrong with those parameters. Excuse me. But she goes on to say in the next page, balanced by religious principles, you may climb to any height you please. So it's in that parenthesis of these short-term metrics on prosperity and success. There is nothing wrong with them, as long as you are pursuing them in a balanced way. And we find out a little bit more of what that is. If we turn through to our Bibles, we open our Bibles to Ecclesiastes 9 verse 10. We've got a few verses here, but I like people to get in and use their Bible. So for those of you who have Bibles, Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10. We're going to go through a few different ways that the Bible talks about prosperity and success. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10. We read, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave where thou goest." So here Solomon acknowledges that after death there's nothing you can do. So while in life, whatever you find to do, whatever you're pursuing, do it to the best of your ability. Don't just get by. We turn back one book to Proverbs chapter 22. The same author, Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 29. "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings, he shall not stand before mean men." Again, the word mean there is average as opposed to unpleasant people. So if you are diligent in your business, there is a promise that you will stand before kings, prominent people, rulers. You won't just be dealing with average people. But again, if you do everything to the best of your ability. We continue on. We stay in Proverbs. We turn back a few chapters to chapter 13. We want to read verse 22. This one talks about family and, I guess you could say, intergenerational wealth. And it's interesting because a lot of research has been done and a number of books written around it, and there is a concept called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And in some other cultures it carries a different name. I think in China it's rice paddy to rice paddy in 3 generations. But essentially the concept is that one generation builds wealth. The next generation enjoys that wealth, and the third generation squanders it to a point where they're back where that first generation started. So to keep wealth long-term intergenerationally, as research has shown, is actually quite a challenge. But there's some advice given here in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. "A good man leave an inheritance to his children's children." So this is to that third generation. "And the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just." So there are 2 points here. There's the concept of a wealth transfer. The wealth of the sinner is laid up in store for the just in some way, shape or form, whether it's through good business practice or not. I'll leave that to you to speculate, but here through the pen of inspiration, Solomon has written that in some way, shape or form, a wealth transfer takes place from those who are not righteous to those who are. But in the first part of the verse, it points out that a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. So he leaves something to pass on. He doesn't just squander it himself. And we find somebody later on, there'll be an example of someone who passed the majority of their wealth on, made their heirs not very happy. But it's quite an interesting story. We get to that a little later on. We go to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 58. Right before Jeremiah. Isaiah 58. We want to look at verses 6 through 8. We may not read it all. We might paraphrase a little. But Isaiah 58. And this talks about, prophetically speaking, of Christ, but it's a admonition or something for us to consider to do today to fulfill this also. "Is not this the fast that I have chosen?" So the purpose that he was here, some people, they will fast or make a sacrifice where they will, give up food or some other thing. But Christ is saying this was his fast. This is what he came to do, to give up some things to do this. to loosen the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou mayest bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hideth not thyself from thine own flesh. So talking about benevolence here, so helping the poor, those who are cast out, the naked, those who need help, essentially, extending your hand to help them. Now, the Spirit of Prophecy expands on this concept and uses the term worthy poor, because there are people who are not willing to help themselves, but those who are either unable or who are willing to help themselves, we're told to reach out and to help them where we're able to. It goes on to give a promise to this command in the next two verses. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteous shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. Thou shalt call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. There's a few interesting things here. That last part, many times God calls out to his servant, and the servant's response is, Here I am. But here it says that the servant will call out to God, or put his petition to God, and God's response is, Here I am. And before that, it goes back to the notion that we had in our key verse in 3 John, which was prosperity, health, in proportion to your soul prospering. And here in verse 8, it talks about your light breaking forth as the morning, your health shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before thee. So it's that same notion, of those same concepts are shared here. We continue on. I think this is our last one in Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28. We won't read this whole half a chapter, but we'll just hone in on verse 1 and verse 13. This chapter is a chapter of promises. So Deuteronomy 28, one page out, and verse 1. And after Israel entered the promised land, Canaan, they were given promises and curses. If you do this, the bad things will happen. If you do this, the good things, these are the good things will happen. So chapter 28 goes through those promises. The previous chapter touches on the curses. But verse 1 we read, And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I have commanded thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations on the earth. This is a promise here given. If you follow my directions, if you do these things that I've commanded, I will lift you above all nations. And if we jump forward to verse 13, And the Lord shall make thee the head and not the tail, and thou shalt be above only, and thou shalt not be beneath. If that thou hearken unto the commandments of the Lord thy God, which I have commanded thee this day, to observe and to do them. So it reiterates that promise, that if you do what God has commanded, he will lift you up. He'll make you the head and not the tail. And some of those things that he has commanded us to do, we've looked at briefly in some of these verses. There is more, but this is sort of, you could say, the heart of some of those points. To look at leaving an inheritance to future generations, to be diligent in business, to extend your hand to those in need, to share righteousness. This is a benevolent way to do things, and there is a promise that accompanies it. Who has heard of Clyde Harris? Nobody. I stumbled across a book some time ago, Lock, Stock and Boards. And it's probably a take on the saying, I won't quote the saying, but many of us probably have it in our mind. But this gentleman started out I think he became an Adventist. I'm not sure if he was an Adventist as a young man. But he started out in business living in a tent after he got married. And there was a point where the tent caught fire and almost burnt down. But he was very diligent in business. And throughout his life, the business grew. And it was essentially the IKEA before IKEA existed. This business led the world, and I'm reading a quote here that's from the book. It led the world in the production of unfinished furniture. So like IKEA, they would essentially make furniture that wasn't assembled, and they would ship it to places, and they had little assembly plants set up in places. So you didn't take it home and assemble it. That was an IKEA thing. But the furniture was flat packed and shipped around the world, and there was assembly plants set up near shops or outlets where people would come, assemble the furniture, and then it would go to the store to be sold. So this company led the world in unfinished furniture production with assembly plants in the United States. That provided, so these assembly plants in the US, provided employment, Sabbath privileges, and Christian education opportunities to mill workers. So it started out with sawmill and plantation timber and ended up growing into furniture production. So it was a whole integrated stream within this business that it grew over time. But he became an Adventist, a Sabbath keeper, and he gave those Sabbath privileges to all his employees. Don't have to work on Sabbath. He was instrumental in building or helping to build schools and churches across the US. Many times he would employ university students, and he would establish those assembly plants close to universities so the students could work there to support themselves while they were going to university. Over the period of his life, this business grew from nothing to an approximate value in $1953 when it was given away of $10 million US. Now, adjusted for inflation, $10 million in 1953 is a little north of $121 million today. But he didn't want to bequeath this when he died. He decided that he was going to bequeath or give this to the church before he passed, so he could see the good that it would do. And the book goes on to explain that. Now, I'm not advocating that people have to build businesses and give them to the church. It's just an example of what this man did. That he followed those principles that we went through looking in those verses earlier, where he reached out to help people where he could. He leveraged his business to do good. And he abided by those principles, and we can see through history and the success of his business how God had blessed him. What are we doing in our life today? Again, a rhetorical question. And going back to some of the points we touched on earlier in our life pursuits, whether it is business or family or whatever the case may be, are we looking for ways to pursue that through a Christian lens where we can leverage that to actually do good? Where we can leverage the benefits that we've given to introduce others to Christ or relieve the needs and sufferings that they have. Now, each of us would have unique aspirations and goals in life that we are pursuing. So we would have unique opportunities that would come across our path throughout our life. So this is not a question that only has one answer. It's something that we have to answer for ourselves. What opportunities do I have? And how can I leverage those to share the gospel? Now, that's not to say that we can't be successful as well. You know, Clyde Harris is a great example of that. Throughout his life, he leveraged his business. Now, others might do it with fame or their reputation or their network of people that they know, whatever their opportunity is. But for this gentleman, it was business. And he leveraged that in a way that could grow and help his business to become successful, while also supplying these needs and fulfilling these other goals. It wasn't purely a self-centered, I want to have a successful business so I can be rich. Again, it's a question for each of us to answer within the sphere in which we live and operate. But as we bring this morning's service to a close, we have one more verse and one more thought to dwell upon. And this is the one that I want you to take away above all. Everything that we've covered off to this point is secondary to this. Still very important, but secondary. For those of you who have Bibles, turn to the book of John, the last of the Gospels, in chapter 19. We want to look at verses 28 to 30. John chapter 19, verse 28. This is speaking of Christ when he was on the cross. Then he said, that's 27, 28. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, he came to this world for a purpose. Two, if you wanted to break it down specifically. So Satan made accusations in heaven and to Adam and Eve, our first parents, that God wasn't just. So Christ came here to show not only this world but the universe that God is just. That was one of his purposes. The other was to pay a price that we could not pay for our sin. We could pay it, but we would end up with the atheistic worldview. After death, there's nothing. There's no coming back. There's no anything. He paid a debt so that we have the opportunity to have another option. So here he is hanging on a cross, and he knows that everything is accomplished. That journey, that concept of the end of life and living a good life, achieving something, that prosper concept that we started out with at the beginning. Here is Christ on the cross, and he has fulfilled that in his life mission. He knows that everything is finished, his purpose. After this, he said, I thirst. We go through 29. They try to give him a drink. We get to verse 30. And when Jesus therefore had received, he said, it is finished. So again, he's declaring, my work is done, the job is done. The price is paid. Salvation is secured for the human race. And God's character is vindicated before the universe. And he bowed his head and he gave up the ghost. So when we think of our purpose in life, whether it's the short-term goals that we are pursuing throughout our life and the way those goals might shift and change as we progress through life, or whether we're thinking of our life in an eternal sense and what's going to happen afterwards, remember that if it wasn't for Christ's sacrifice, for the purpose that he came, we wouldn't even have that option. So let us not neglect what he has done for us. Let us be determined to have a purpose that will honour him, that we can live out our dreams and aspirations through that Christian lens. And paraphrasing a verse from the book of Matthew, that others may see our good works and desire to learn of Christ. Amen.